Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome to our program Influential Muslim Personalities, where we will be holding discussions with Muslims, both men and women, who have been high achievers in their professions, who have made a mark in our society locally and indeed internationally. I'm your host, Saqib Malik, and we hope that we can embark on this journey together so that we can learn about these individuals, so that we can nurture within ourselves our ambitions, our desires to improve as individuals, our desires to fulfill our role in society, and our desires to live a holistic life as Muslims. Today, we are privileged and esteemed to have the Vice Chancellor of Raaf International University, Professor Mohamed Bakari, with us, who will discuss his position as the Vice Chancellor at the university. And we will talk to him at length, inshallah, about his achievements, about what made him go into this field, and about how we can now follow and nurture our ambitions through him. Professor Mohamed Bakari, welcome very much to the program.
Thank you very much.
If we could start with the meaning, the very unique meaning of Raaf. What does Raaf stand for?
Raaf is an acronym, in fact an Arabic acronym that stands for Mercy and Compassion for Humanity. Because the sponsors initially were humanitarian philanthropists. And this is their choice of the university.
Okay, just as out of curiosity, mercy and compassion, mashallah, with your extensive background in academia, does it have any links to education? Would you be able to find any link to education between mercy and compassion, and how our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam promulgated the idea of education, of expanding our minds?
Yeah. The point is, if you give somebody an education, you are being extremely merciful to them.
Subhanallah.
Because without education, somebody would be sort of disoriented, and especially in the contemporary world. So part of that compassion is to be merciful, to the child, whether this is your child or it is somebody else's child, or a child from any background, whether Muslim, Christian, Hindu, or whatever. So education is something that had been recognized, as one of the most important things.
Right. So actually giving somebody education is being merciful to them on a humanitarian level, at a level of a human being. You are actually you're being nice to them by educating them.
It's not being actually nice to them, is to make them useful to themselves, to their immediate family, and to the larger human society.
Subhanallah, subhanallah, excellent. Professor Bakari, if we could start with your background, basic background. If you could tell us how, from the beginning, how you went into your early years, how you were nurtured in your childhood, the emphasis that your family placed upon education, and what got you onto the path of your chosen career?
By coincidence, I come from a line of people who are very, very concerned about education, both on the maternal side and on the paternal side. On the paternal side, I come from these Sayyid families that came from Tarim in the Hadramaut, way back in the 17th, 18th century, and settled on on the island of Pate, but specifically on the settlement that is called Siu, which is next to another settlement called Shanga.
Sorry, is this on the East African coast?
This is on the Lamo Alamo archipelago. And Siu was an intellectual center in its own right because there were copyists there who were copying these important manuals. Many of us actually don't know about this history. Maybe we know it as oral history, but the importance of that place has been documented by the late friend of mine, James de Vere Allen. James de Vere Allen was a British Dutch historian, and in fact he was the pioneer of in fact, the person who initiated the Lamu Museum and took a very keen interest in Swahili culture, in Islamic culture along the East African coast. His background was history. He studied history at Oxford and also taught at Makerere and the University of Nairobi. So he wrote a very interesting article way back in the late 70s for the Kenya Historical Association conference on this cottage industry in Siu, where people became copies and they copied books, that were important. In fact, they made copies of copies, because here we're talking about a situation where there were no printing facilities.
Right, yeah. Right, Professor. If we'll come back to that aspect. What I wanted to learn initially, and subhanallah, it's very interesting that you come from a family, you come from a both paternal and maternal background where education was emphasized. So, as a young boy growing up, were there any challenges you faced going to school, or was it just a very something that just came naturally in your family setting? Is that something that came that was fostered within you, and you had a very enabling environment? The reason I'm asking that is that for individuals now, maybe for youngsters now who might not have that sort of a family setting. So was it something that came in naturally in your family? Was it something that you found no obstacles in your young years?
I think this, as I said, has everything to do with the family, because almost everybody, both on the maternal and paternal side, were literate. So my grandparents and great-grandparents were literate, and they came from the Islamic intellectual background.
Subhanallah, yes.
Yeah. So the emphasis, of course, was Islamic education mostly.
Right.
But I moved to Mombasa at the age of 5, and was taken to primary school way back in 1957. Mm-hmm. I was probably 6 or thereabouts. And then, of course, that was a different kind of education. It's what we call, secular education. Right. The period was within the context of the colonial period, right, where the system segregated different groups.
Even in Kenya?
Of course, this is what I'm saying, right. Kenya.
Right.
For example, Asians were supposed to go to Asian schools. Mm-hmm. Africans were supposed to go to African schools. And Muslims were invariably all put under the umbrella of Arabs. Mm-hmm. Like I remember my classmates, some of them were Luya, from Kakamega. Okay. but because they were Muslim, they were categorized.
So that was the mindset.
That was the mindset at the time.
If you're a Muslim, you're an Arab.
Absolutely, yes.
Irrespective of your ethnicity.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
So in a sense, that was an advantage, because Muslim schools had very varied ethnic and racial mixture. So it gave us the opportunity of
So you see
interacting.
that as a strength.
Absolutely.
It turned out, although it was something based on discrimination, it turned out to be something which was which gave strength to the Muslim students.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And when I went to high school, this was Khamis Secondary School at that time.
Right. A very well-known secondary school in
Yes,
Mombasa.
very well-known secondary school at that time. And then again, that was presumably exclusively for Muslims. But it also admitted non-Muslims. And we never felt very different.
Subhanallah.
We interacted with...
So there's a sense of accommodation.
Yeah, absolutely.
From that age.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
From different religious backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Not only religious background, even ethnic backgrounds. So, in a sense, those were unintended consequences, of the colonial system. Yeah. Again, fortunately, I went to high school at the cusp of independence. The end of the colonial period and the beginning of independent Kenya in 1964.
So this you would say that brought about when like when you were in school, in both in primary school and in secondary school, you interacted with people from different backgrounds. Would you say that at that time, in the Kenya of the 50s and the 60s, how would you classify in people's approach towards education? Did you find a desire amongst the Kenyan society, the wider Kenyan society, whether it was Asians, whether it was Arabs, whether it was Africans, did you find a strong desire in them to get themselves educated? Did you find, or was it compared to current times? How would you classify it? Was there a desire then?
First, I want to say that there's an enormous literature on the colonial period and the post-colonial period. Literature on education and development of education in Kenya, yes. Both at the coast and up country. And for Muslims, it was some kind of dilemma because most of the schools during the colonial period, initially before the formal incorporation of Kenya as a colony, it was under the dominance of the missionaries, and Muslims were naturally inclined towards resistance for that kind of education, because they feared that they would be forcibly converted. And of course the missionaries, because these are their institutions, they can determine who comes in and who doesn't go in, yeah. Because the colonial system wanted people to work within the colonial bureaucracy, they also needed non-Christians, within the system. So what later became Muslim schools were actually created by the colonial the colonial government, because they knew that if the government did intervene, then Muslims would not go, to these schools. In fact, they had to persuade Muslims by looking for Muslim headmasters. Again, these were very rare people, people who have had Western education. But they were able to identify people. And these people were supposed to be people of standing in the community so that they are accepted. And ironically, in the Muslim primary schools, most of the teachers were actually either Europeans or Asians, actually Indians who had been imported, from India to come and teach in these schools. I was privileged to be taught by one Mr. Barnum, who also taught King Hussein of Jordan. This is the irony, Yeah, I don't know how Mr. Barnum came, but you could see that he was...
So you have something in common with the royal lineage of Jordan.
Those are the quirks of history,
Right,
Yeah.
right.
But you could see he was a different kind of, of teacher.
Right.
The way he dressed, the way he carried himself, with dignity, with seriousness.
And of course, that had an impact on the students as well.
Definitely, yes.
Now, when you were there as a student, like with mashallah, and I would say this with the utmost respect, that you came from a privileged background in the sense that you had a family who knew the importance, the weightiness of education. Did you find other Muslim students with you who also came from similar backgrounds? Or what I'm interested in knowing is that were there Muslims who also came from backgrounds in which education was emphasized, or was it just because it was the norm of the day, you have to go to school, so you're going to school irrespective of whether your mother or your father was educated or not?
Yeah. I think Muslims at that time
Yes.
Did not consider Islam, they didn't consider education as an instrumental thing, They didn't instrumentalize that. You went to madrasa, for example, or you went to school just for the sake of being educated. Because we didn't have this vision of, people becoming great scientists or great writers or whatever, It just happened. And the background that I came from was not very different from that, for example, that Professor Ali Mazrui, Professor Mohamed Haidar, Professor Ahmed Ida Salim, and many of these, we all went to the same schools, but and even the teachers, were local people that also later we knew. Some of these were actually quite influential within the society, like Madam Ali Abu Bakar, who taught me, who taught Sheikh Abdullah Nasser, and taught quite a number of other people.
MashaAllah. Professor Bakari, the discussion is getting really intriguing, and we will be back shortly. We have to go on a small break. Please do stay with us. Welcome back to Influential Muslim Personalities. We are privileged to have Professor Mohamed Bakari from Raaf University. And as we proceed with our discussions, Professor, we were talking about your early years in education. If we could move on from that, how did you then, how was your transition from school into university? And what did you, how did you decide on the path you are going to take, the career you're going to take? Indeed, what was your line of interest as you moved from school into university?
First of all, there weren't many people who went to university, in the environments in which we were in. And even those who went to university just did a diploma in education. Because again, that had something to do with the colonial setup. Like, for example, within the colonial setup, the only two Muslims, were allowed to go to university in any 1 year.
That was the quota?
Yes, that was the quota. No matter how well they might have done. I think that was also a way of control, and those who did well, and in fact, a number of my own teachers had done very well, but instead of being admitted, to go to Makerere, they became primary school teachers. you know. But these were such highly intelligent people like Professor Mohamed Abdulaziz, you know, who taught me both in high school and also at the university, found their own way, you know, to university. So,
so subhanallah, whenever there's constraints, whenever there's limitations put on people, and specifically we are talking about our Muslims here, individuals who have a resolve, I think that's the point that we need to make, to emphasize. When you have a resolve, when you have that himmah, you can find a way out.
Oh, absolutely. And Muslims had to do that because, for example, for students of Christian background who did well in primary school, had alliance waiting for them, you know?
Right.
Or the other schools, you know, like Maseno.
Lenana.
Although Lenana was really for the Asian students, you know.
Okay.
But for example, many people don't know that Alliance is actually a short form of Alliance of Protestant Missions.
All right.
So the Protestant missions came together, you know, to pool resources and establish Alliance High School.
And it was just for Protestant students?
For Protestants, yes.
Okay.
You know. So, for example, during the Mau Mau struggle, there was an attempt to frustrate the Kikuyu, you know, from getting access to education. And then there were also other issues, you know, like female circumcision and so on and so forth. So the Kikuyu resisted by establishing their own schools. And President Kenyatta, you know, at that time actually was one of the pioneers of these Karinga schools, as they were called, with Mbiu Koinange. So they came back, they were teachers, you know, in these schools. So those who were stopped, you know, from going to these missionary schools found another alternative. And these were completely independent, modest attempts, you know, by the people.
Right. Professor Bakari, you talk about, a concerted, institutionalized effort, like, for example, with our late president, with Mbiu Koinange, working towards ensuring that Kikuyus or people who, because of the Mau Mau struggle, who are marginalized, that they could proceed ahead. What I want to know is that as far as now, the barriers placed in front of the Muslims, at that time, was it individual Muslims then who made their way forward, or did Muslims also come together in an organizational setup in order to help Muslims, marginalized Muslims, move forward? What was happening then?
Yeah.
As far as the Muslims are concerned.
Muslims are also perceptive, you know, in their own ways, and they knew that there were certain obstacles placed on their way. But that did not deter them from starting certain initiatives. Like what is today Mombasa Technical University, that was actually established by Muslims.
MashaAllah. And the reason for that was because of these difficulties placed in front of them.
Yeah, not only that, no, they just wanted to have their own institution and give them the kind of education they would like.
Right.
In fact, Muslims were pioneers in technical education.
So in Kenya.
Yeah, so what is today the Mombasa Technical University was called Muslim Institute for Muslim Education. You know, Miome, that was the initial, and the Aga Khan, the grandfather of the current Aga Khan.
Ismaili leader, yes.
Yes, Ismaili leader, in fact, contributed a substantial amount of time. And this was during the colonial period. And the Sultan of Zanzibar also chipped in. But the people themselves also contributed. So, for example, the land of the Mombasa Technical University and the high school, you know, next to it also, was donated actually by Muslims. Yes.
So, Alhamdulillah, it's very heartening to know that Muslims had the foresight, they had the vision to get together and to be able to consolidate their resources and to move forward.
Yeah, and the other point that I would like to draw your attention to is the fact that it was not confined to Kenyan Muslims. Muslims from Uganda, from Tanganyika, were also admitted, into.
So it was a joint effort, cross-border joint
absolutely, effort. Absolutely, yes, and beyond ethnic lines.
All right,
like the very famous Kenyan broadcaster Mohamed Juguna.
Yes,
he is an alumnus of Mombasa Technical University. He was telling me.
I remember as a secondary student listening to him on the news and seeing him on VOK, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this technical inclination, was nurtured in that institution.
Right, subhanallah. That is extremely inspiring to know. So you moved ahead into university, and yes.
Yeah, from Khamis Secondary School, I went to Alidina to do my A-levels.
All right.
Because the exams at that time were all overseas exams. I did the Cambridge Overseas, or what we used to call O-levels, or what is now KCA, SE, yes, yeah. And then after that, those who had ambitions of going to university had to do A-levels. And the importance of A-levels is that it actually prepares you for university, because the subjects are more advanced, and then you get opportunities, to learn the necessary skills to help you at the university. The expressive skills, both verbal and written. So we read a lot of books, and we selected just 3 subjects initially. Like in my case, for my A-levels, I did economics, history, and English. But at the O-level, I did all the subjects. Both the sciences and the humanities.
So
physics,
you had
chemistry.
A strong grounding in an array of subjects.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And this is, I think, very important because, especially in our contemporary world, even if somebody is going to fail, for example, in physics, I think they should take courses, in physics, or chemistry, or biology, and those in the sciences should also do the humanities, because this will give you a much broader understanding of the contemporary world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very necessary. Right. So you moved into university, and looking at mashallah, your achievements are phenomenal, Professor. And I'm not I'm saying this because I have gone through what your achievements are, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you the tawfiq to achieve even more, and to be able to benefit all of us within this society. So you you had an inclination towards humanities, you had an inclination towards literature, you had an inclination towards linguistics, social linguistics. What was the reason for that?
Yeah. Actually, I had, if I had my own way, I would have continued actually with chemistry. This would surprise you. Simply because, we had a very good chemistry teacher.
And you enjoyed the subject.
And I did enjoy, and the teacher liked me, So that was also the bonus. But in fact, I didn't want to do any of these things. I would have loved, to do architecture. I remember, some of my contemporaries at the University of Nairobi said, Mohammed, you like reading, why did you do medicine? I said, I'm not very good at memorizing. I would have completely failed. I would like to think, things. Because many of these, I mean, the way it is taught,
right?
Is that this is,
rote memory.
Yeah, it's just rote things,
Right.
It's not important to understand them.
Right.
In fact, this is one of the reasons why we have not really been creative, in a sense.
Right.
Like, for example, in Europe or in the US, anybody who studies the sciences has to do courses, for example, in the history and philosophy of science, so that people know, the history of biological studies, history of medicine, history of engineering, or philosophy of engineering.
So, Professor, you found that humanities actually encourages you to think, to be inquisitive. Is that what sort of is that what pulled you into this field?
Actually, this is what turned out, but because I wanted to do something that I can use later, for example, do education and then go and teach and then take care of the family. Because I happen to be a single child, so I didn't have the opportunity of being spoiled because there was no money to spoil me, So I had to find something, that I could have, But if I was given another lifetime,
yes.
I would most likely have gone to study architecture.
Okay.
I have an interest in arts, in design, and But I've read these things by myself. So, but it doesn't mean these are artificial boundaries. Humanities, social sciences, and the so-called natural sciences.
Okay.
And there were debates, in the 1950s, for example, in Britain about the fallacy of separating these disciplines. And there was a very famous debate between a Cambridge Don, C.P. Snow. He gave a lecture there that was later published into a book, and it's called Two Cultures. Okay. Because C.P. Snow came from a science background, okay. But he was also a novelist. All right. So he questioned, the wisdom, right. of people in the humanities just right. sticking their noses, in humanities and right. the so-called, hard sciences. Right. No, he said these are artificial, and this had an impact right. In curricular thinking later. For example, in the U.S., they incorporated, some of that debate okay. between C.P. Snow and F.R. Leavis, who was a literary critic and professor of literature at Cambridge again. Yeah. So the Americans took that idea so that if you do the humanities, then you must do an elective or some electives in science. All right. And if you are doing scientific disciplines, then you have to take electives in the humanities. Right. And of course, look at the American society. Right. Right. Look at their inventiveness. Right. Look at their creativity. Right. Because to be an engineer is not enough. You must be a designer. You must know the history of all these designs. And again, the Americans benefited a lot from talent from Europe. There was, for example, the famous Bauhaus movement. Okay. That moved from the classical architecture to modernist architecture and so on and so forth. So that now architecture became not something grandiose, but very practical. Right. In terms of functionality. Right. So where did all these people get these ideas from? Right. Because they straddled both areas. Right. So, Professor, you went into humanities. If very briefly you could tell us the universities that you studied at, yeah. and the courses that you took, yeah. very briefly. Yeah. I went, of course. Our hero at that time was Professor Ali Mazrui, right. Very controversial, right. Public intellectual, right. who engaged in public debates. Right. Wow, I said, I want to become a political scientist also, right. And I want to go to Makerere. Right. But fate, changed all that because when I went to university, right. Now what was before the University of East Africa, with campuses in Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, and Makerere, had been dismantled. So now we had autonomous University of Nairobi, autonomous University at Makerere, and autonomous university in Dar es Salaam.
Okay.
Because before then, we had, as I said, University of East Africa. Okay. So all our lawyers were trained at Dar es Salaam. You know, Willy Mutunga, Wako, and that generation, of people.
Professor, just on that very interesting thought about how the universities were demarcated, we will take a short break and we will come back again to carry on with our discussions with Professor Bakari. Please do stay with us. Alhamdulillah, welcome back. We are with Professor Mohamed Bakari, going through an extremely intriguing journey into his life, into his achievements. Professor, you were talking about your university education. If you could carry on.
Yeah. From Alidina, I was admitted to the University of Nairobi because, as I said, at that time, there was the University of East Africa. But in 1970, the university was sort of devolved, and we had autonomous universities. So I could not, at that time, go to Makerere. So I was directed to the University of Nairobi. And then, of course, when you got there, you selected, whatever you wanted to do. As I said, if I had another lifetime, I would have done different things.
Architecture, maybe.
So I was approached by Professor Abdelaziz and said, we've just established a department of linguistics, and I want you to come and, and do linguistics. I said, fine. So I did linguistics and then also studied history and education, with a view that later, I would go and teach. But I did education actually as an elective. Okay. So it was just by mere coincidence, that I became a linguist, because after this I went and did postgraduate work at the University of York in England, and also came back and did other postgraduate degrees at the University of Nairobi. In fact, this is where I got my doctorate.
Right, Professor. And you've mashallah, you've traveled a lot. You've taught extensively in Turkey as well, I believe. Yes. You have, Professor is a very prolific writer as well, a prolific writer of articles. Professor has got several books to his credit. I believe there is a book that you're currently working on as well, Professor. Now, the articles that you write, they talk about social linguistics, they talk about literature. What is their relevance to our times today?
I think anything that is based on research is relevant and important. And whether it is not for now, it is for the future, it will still have some use. I tended to write basically, initially, because I was doing my advanced degrees. I had to specialize, and I specialized in linguistics. And of course, at that time, the dominant paradigm was Chomsky's generative grammar.
All right. Is that Noam Chomsky?
Yeah, Noam Chomsky, yes. Right. And this was a very revolutionary theoretical model, because it completely changed our understanding of language that had been there, for centuries. Right. And he challenged other dominant groups.
Right.
Many people tend to think that Chomsky's ideas were very original, but in fact, the most original person was a Swiss professor,
right.
Actually a Swiss scholar by the name of Ferdinand Dissessou.
Okay.
who was Swiss but got his doctorate at Leipzig University.
All right.
He came up with extremely original ideas
Right.
about the nature of language.
Uh-huh.
Yes, and he contributed a lot to our understanding of historical linguistics. You know, how languages undergo change.
How they evolve.
Yeah, how the
And the origins as well?
the origins. This is a myth. You know, we can't talk about origin.
You can't pinpoint the origin of a language.
No, linguists don't do that kind of thing.
All right.
They're only interested in synchronic and diachronic studies of language.
Right.
Language as it is today.
Right.
And then we can project back.
Right.
You know, to for example, English in the 16th century.
Right.
English in the 12th century.
Right.
You know, or Kiswahili in the 18th century.
Right.
You know, we reconstruct
Right.
you know, the nature of these languages on the basis of texts that exist,
Right.
or in the absence of text, then we project on the basis of the sounds, you know, that are there.
Right.
Because linguistics is a science.
Right.
And the importance of science is that it is predictive.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to predict. You know, it is things are logical.
You have to predict outcomes?
But yes, but not predict. You know, in the kind of way that which doctor will, or you know, or a seer. You know,
Methodologies.
Yeah, absolutely.
In which
Yes,
you
yeah.
go about
Based on data.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And there are explanatory models.
Right,
You know.
right.
So there are different.
Mashallah, Professor, this is such an interesting and intellectually stimulating topic, and of course we need to discuss this further at a different forum. What I would like to bring in for the benefit of our viewers, whether they are young or whether they are senior people, and if you can, the advice that you would give to Muslims, youngsters, and indeed senior Muslims as well, about the importance, firstly, the importance of education, and secondly, that education is not just about earning your daily bread, what else it can do to you. And if you could collate this with, now in your vast experience as a person who imparts knowledge, as a professor, as a teacher, some of the things that you've seen, challenges that individuals face, and how they could overcome those. And I'm looking at this from the point of view of the Muslim student. What is it that, I mean, in your experience, what challenges have you seen Muslims facing in their as they embark upon the journey of studying? And what are the words of hope that you have for youth as well as older people about education and about its importance?
I think one big advice I would like to give parents, you know, and Kenyans in general, because I'm a patriot,
Right.
is that don't impose your ideas, you know, on your child, because your child is not you, you know. They're made up of completely different kinds of genes from you, although you might share a few, you know. But these are individual personalities with their own abilities, you know, with their own futures. And we tend to force kids, you know, into certain areas. Maybe because, you know, I wanted to become a doctor, I didn't become one, you know, so at least...
My son should become a
doctor. But, you know, I can vicariously enjoy, you know, the status of being a doctor, you know,
right.
or an engineer. And you will find that this is a universal Muslim problem, you know. In the Middle East, everybody is Bash Muhandis or doctor, you know.
Right.
Yeah, but what about you know, sociologists, you know, anthropologists, you know, historians,
right.
you know, lawyers, and so on and so forth.
Right.
You know,
right.
So we must have a much broader view of education.
Right.
You know, we always look at what other people have done. You know, and we want to copy those people. No, I think we must have a more holistic view of knowledge. Okay. You know, we mustn't only monetize, you know, education or instrumentalize education, and especially for Muslims,
Right.
because your risk doesn't come from your profession.
Subhanallah.
You know, it comes directly from God. This is what we.
That is our belief.
Yes, you know, yeah, and you know, if you will find, for example, in some societies, they are quite successful. Like for example, in India, they are passionate about medicine. You know, the fact that later they make money, you know, this is just incidental. But they are passionate about what they are doing.
So follow your passions.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there are many frustrated doctors, you know, or frustrated engineers.
Right.
And I found this, you know, in other Muslim societies.
Right.
You know, okay.
It's there in Kenya as well? You found this in Kenya
Of
also?
course, especially amongst Muslims.
All right.
You know, because the Muslim kids don't do what interests them, you know.
It's what interests their parents.
Yes, absolutely. If, you know, if they want to, for example, to study music, why not art or design? You know, why not? You know, and there's we don't know because we don't have a reading culture, so we don't know. You know what is happening. There are artists who are billionaires. You know, yes, in other parts of the, you know, for example, there's this famous Colombian artist, Botero. You know, he's a billionaire.
From doing artwork.
Artwork, yes. Wai, you know, the Chinese artist. You
he's
know,
a dissident now. But,
yeah, absolutely.
but
Yeah,
very well recognized.
yeah,
in the
absolutely.
World.
There are so many. You know, I mean, if it is making money, you know, this is something that comes later. You know, and not all doctors are rich. You know, or the engineers.
And
you
Professor,
know, are
how
rich.
does that balance with our deen? How does that? I mean, it's not like you're going contrary to the teachings of Islam, is it? When you follow your passion, obviously, as long as you do what is halal,
Yeah.
you're not going contrary.
Yeah. For example, there are not enough Muslim architects. You know, there are not enough Muslim artists. You know, even here, for example, you know, there is hardly any calligrapher. You know, and this is a great
Kenya.
art.
In
You know,
Kenya.
in the whole of East Africa.
Right.
You know, there are no Muslim calligraphers, and you can actually earn a living. You know, on this. You can go and do a PhD. You know, in this area.
So follow your passion, and the risk will come. The doors will open.
No, the risk is always there.
It's always there.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. You know,
Right.
go and read Hadith Qudsi. You know, it will tell you precisely this. You know, every creature that is created, you know, has its risk already.
For it,
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You know, so I think we must have a much broader understanding of this. Other communities have moved actually towards this. But we are still stuck.
We have to look into
that.
that.
We are still stuck, you know, in this old mold.
Right. Professor, and as far as age is concerned, we, subhanAllah, we read about individuals now, Muslims, after the age of 60, doing hifd of Quran. They are memorizing the Quran after the age of 60. We have this notion in our mind that things can only be achieved when you're young. What do you have to say in regards to that, about age not being a barrier? If you could say something on that.
I think this is related or connected to education. You know, that education is a lifetime pursuit. You know, I'm always reading new books. You know, I'm following trends, you know, in different areas. You know, and you don't have to be stuck, you know, in one area. Like, for example, in the 1980s, I realized that we hardly had any understanding of ourselves, you know, in this country. We don't know our social, political, economic, you know, and other aspects, you know, of Muslim community here, because there was no literature. Nobody was addressing these issues. You know, in fact, that's why I began looking at some of these aspects and writing about them. You know, because we had not trained. You know, like it's very difficult to get Muslim academics, you know, professors. There are very, very few Muslim professors. How did we get here? It's because we're telling everybody to study business, telling everybody, you know, to study this and that, you know, because they're going to get money, you know, out of this.
These articles that you've written or this research that you've done, how can the general public access this? Where can we read this?
I think it's in the nature of academic work.
Yeah.
You know.
But where can we read
to be published?
Yes.
Yeah, they are in journals. You know, they are books.
Can we see them online?
Yeah, the problem is Muslims don't read. You know?
Which is why I asked these questions.
Yeah, I've just published a biography of one of the leading ulama, of the 50s, 60s,
Right.
And 70s, in fact, in the 80s. Right. This is Sayyid Umar Abdullah from the Comoro.
Sayyid Umar Abdullah.
Yes. This was a very fascinating individual. He was a contemporary of Sheikh Abdullah Saleh Farsi, who was, in fact, they were classmates.
Our Chief Qadi?
Yeah, the Chief Qadi. Yeah.
Yes.
But this man was far more advanced than Sheikh Abdullah Saleh Farsi. Right. Although this is not to underestimate, his contribution, to Islam. He translated the Quran, into Swahili. But Sayyid Umar Abdullah had a much broader vision of the kind of society, that Muslims should build, because he was trained within the Islamic East African intellectual tradition, and then went to University of London, to do comparative law, and then went to Oxford, to study philosophy. In fact, he was the first East African, to study philosophy formally, So I published, I've done research on him and published this book, the Forgotten Muslim Public Intellectual, I called him, But this book seems to be bought more by non-Muslims than by Muslims, because it's non-Muslims who actually read, So there's no way that Muslims can advance themselves, without having a reading culture, because no society will advance without having a reading culture.
Right.
And you will notice that the development of a society is commensurate with its reading culture.
Always. That has been the historical...
Absolutely. Look at Japan, There is no illiterate Japanese. You never find an illiterate Japanese in that society. So are you surprised that they are technologically very advanced?
Right.
Yes.
It comes naturally. Yeah. Once you have a desire to read.
Absolutely. You look at Germans; they have a very strong intellectual culture.
Right.
There are thousands and thousands of books that are published in a year. In these
countries.
Absolutely, yes. A book, for example, that was published in the US 6 months ago. It's just pulped now, because there are new books, that are always coming, because people are reading all the time. Yes. We're just stuck.
And you find this lacking in our Muslim society.
No, it's not only Muslim society, all third world societies.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And how did we get to this point? This is a mystery, because Muslims had very strong, during the medieval period, and then you had a decline,
in Muslim scholarship.
Absolutely, so if we don't develop a reading culture...
So if it is something you want to tell our people, it's read.
No, from the level of the family, a father and a mother, should be reading. Then the kids will read, because there will be books,
They'll see that happening within their own homestead.
Yeah, because things just don't happen. They have to be made to happen, How many libraries have Muslims built? I don't think there's any library that has been built, by Muslims here in Nairobi, for example. Does this mean that Muslims don't have a need? You go to the mosques, there are only copies of the Quran. It doesn't mean that. They should not read the Quran, but the Quran, produced enormous knowledge. In the areas of linguistics,
various
disciplines. Yeah, absolutely, yes. But we are hardly aware of this. And I think this is where the imams can play an important role. In highlighting this aspect.
Professor Bakari, unfortunately, due to the limitations of time, we will have to cut short our discussion. It has been, subhanAllah, an extremely fruitful discussion. There is so much that you have told us, so much that we have learned, so much that we still need to learn from you. Inshallah, we will try to have a separate forum, maybe a follow-up program, in which we will be able to invite you again to share with us, to impart to us your words of wisdom. Viewers, this has been an eye-opener for me, and I pray that it has been an eye-opener, and it has been something that has opened our perspectives towards new horizons. The discussions that we've had here with Professor Mohamed Bakari, some of the things that we need to take away from this, some of the things that we need to keep in mind, is that we need to develop a reading culture amongst Muslims. We need to develop a reading culture, not just Muslims, as Professor Bakari said, in the third world, that we need to read. It'll open up new vistas, it'll open up new perspectives towards life today. We need to not impose our own standards, our own desires upon our children. We need to let them follow their own passions. As Professor said, we should not live vicariously through them. If it is something that we have not done, we should not force them to do what they need to do. Like the Professor said, our rizq is written by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to follow what interests us. We need to follow our passions. We need to excel. We need to be good. Our societies need engineers. They need doctors. They need lawyers. They need calligraphers. They need plumbers. They need mechanics. It is fard kifaya in our society to have all these things in order to have a society that is healthy, that can nourish itself, that can move ahead. The Prophet, our esteemed visitor talked about being able to have knowledge on different matters. So if you are a linguist, it doesn't mean that you focus just on linguistics. It means that you read about sciences. It means that you read about new developments going on. It means that you become a human being who is an individual that is all encompassing, somebody who knows the world that he lives in. We hope that within these few minutes we have been able to gain something from our discussions, that we have been able to gain some insights which inshallah will help us move forward in our lives. Until our next program, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.